Hello, in this video I'm going to be answering the question of whether the Atlantic Ocean was ever non-navigable. And I'm going to be referencing Plato's dialogues and also some basic geographical and historical knowledge. So Plato makes a very interesting claim in his dialogue Timaeus, which is one of the two dialogues in which Atlantis is discussed. And he says that before the destruction of Atlantis, which took place in 9600 BC, that the Atlantic Ocean was actually navigable to ships, and that after its destruction, it was made unnavigable because of the presence of a shoal of mud in the way that was caused by the subsidence of the island, and the important passages I have highlighted. And that's a very interesting claim because Plato himself says that, and it seems to be obviously wrong. Presumably, in the time that Plato wrote his dialogues, the Atlantic Ocean could have been navigated just as it was able to be navigated in after the 15th century during the Age of Discovery, when connections between Europe and the Americas was finally achieved. And so the idea that the Atlantic Ocean was it is true that it wasn't navigated, but that's very different from saying that it was not navigable because of the presence of mud or other obstructions in the ocean. That seems to be completely false. But could Plato have actually been wrong only in a sense of the precise timeline of the non-navigability of the Atlantic Ocean? That is, if we looked back to around 7,000 to 8,000 years ago, or 8,000 to 7,000 BC, just 1,000 years or so after Atlantis was presumably destroyed, could it actually have been that Plato's claim about the Atlantic being unable to be navigated could have been actually true? I'm going to be analyzing and trying to get an answer to this claim. And here, I asked the question, could the Atlantic Ocean have been much more dangerous to sail in the distant past, say between 10,000 to 8,000 years ago? We know that the Atlantic Ocean was feared by sailors before the time of Columbus. Some of the sailors, even the ones on Columbus's voyage, believed that this sea was endless or that they would fall off the edge of the earth if they went too far. But clearly, in 1492, notwithstanding the hurricanes that form every autumn in the hurricane season in the Atlantic Ocean, the dangers of the Atlantic Ocean seem to have been very much overstated. And it was much more of a psychological barrier than an actual geographical barrier, it seems like. But could that have been wrong around 7,000 to 3,000 BC versus 1492? That is, what if the destruction of Atlantis, just as Plato's dialogue said, resulted in an Atlantic Ocean that was treacherous and filled with debris, that made a transatlantic voyage so dangerous that it was practically impossible? First, we need to understand a concept known as Oceanus, which is the Earth-encircling stream. The Greeks believed that the Atlantic Ocean was a river, in a sense. They believed that this Oceanus was a river that encircled the entire Atlantic Ocean, which was the world ocean as they conceived it. And here I highlight the passage that clearly establishes that the waters of the Atlantic Ocean were believed to be Oceanus, or the ocean sea, that was represented as this river-like entity. But it turns out that metaphorical description of Oceanus, or of the Atlantic Ocean, is remarkably accurate geographically. The North Atlantic's ocean currents are precisely and accurately described as a river. But Europeans hadn't the slightest idea of the North Atlantic's ocean currents until at earliest Columbus's first voyage, and this didn't become common knowledge until the mid-16th century. Now, we may speculate that there were several pre-Columbian expeditions. For example, we know that the Vikings traveled to Greenland and Vinland, which is considered to be in modern-day North America. But but we are fairly certain that they did not have knowledge of these oceanic currents that would have enabled them to traverse this ocean with the confidence and the certainty of knowing that once they sailed to the Americas, they could find their way back. And so, did the ancient Greeks just happen to choose precisely the correct metaphor to describe the Atlantic's circulation patterns? Or could there be another explanation to account for their seemingly advanced understanding of the currents of the Atlantic Ocean? And here's an alternative explanation that accounts for this. We first have to realize that ocean currents can't really be seen. They are invisible in that we can't just look at the ocean and see the flow of the water moving. Or it's certainly not something that somebody can just notice just looking at a body of water. It's not like actual rivers where you can see the water flowing. And so my idea is that at one point in time, there was a massive amount of debris that was floating in the Atlantic Ocean as a result of the destruction of Atlantis that turned the Atlantic into just this mud soup like body of water where there was a tremendous amount of debris and floating objects being carried in the Atlantic and circulating all the way around so that the objects were actually so that the flow of the currents in the water was actually immediately visible because of the objects that were in the water. That is, the Atlantic Ocean may have looked something like this between 9,000 and 5,000 BC. Of course, this is perhaps an extreme example. There obviously wouldn't be plastic objects as there are here, but I'm saying that there could have been a vast amount of debris and wood and other objects that were ultimately carried into the waters of the Atlantic Ocean as a result of the destruction of Atlantis. And so this is really the only way that the ancient peoples of the Mediterranean who lived by the shores of the Atlantic could have ever conceptualized the Atlantic Ocean as a river. Because if the Atlantic was clear as it is today, unless they had actually sailed the Atlantic Ocean at that distant time, there was no way of them being able to understand how the water and the currents were actually flowing. That requires an incredibly advanced science of navigation and a long experience and a tremendous amount of experience with actually sailing the ocean. And that requires us to believe that these mariners were sailing the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, thousands of years earlier than we know that they actually did. And so that explains why the question of why the Atlantic Ocean is not filled with this debris right now, or even a few hundred years ago, or maybe even 1,000 years ago. It was that it was gradually cleared out and sank to the bottom of the ocean over a period of millennia, but that during that formative period of around 7,000 to maybe 11,000 years ago, the Atlantic Ocean could have been a very, very different place and a different body of water than it is today. And that during that time, a time before history, before recorded history, that metaphor for the Atlantic Ocean as a river was ultimately solidified, essentially, and that memory of the Atlantic in the distant past has been remembered in the form of the metaphor of the Earth encircling ocean and Oceanus. And so it turns out that Plato maybe could have been right about that Plato could have been correct about the idea that the Atlantic Ocean really was not navigable a short time period after the destruction of Atlantis.